Hi, everyone, and welcome to Read This Now, the weekly webcast where Brad Gustafson and myself share two books that we love and think you should read right now. Brad is still off enjoying the holidays with his family, and so I have my other brother from another mother, Mr. Travis,
Hmm.
here with me, a frequent guest host on Read This Now. Travis, want to introduce yourself for the three people out there who don't know you?
Absolutely. So I'm Travis Crowder. I'm a seventh grade English teacher in Western North Carolina. I'm also a writer, voracious reader, and I think that's probably why you thought I'd be a perfect addition to this show.
Plus, I just think you're funny, and I like to hang out with you.
Yeah,
Travis and I go way, way back,
yeah,
right?
we do.
Travis looks like he's in middle school still, but you can only imagine he looked like he was in elementary school when we met, right?
Yeah, that's right. I was in my fourth fourth year of teaching, I think, or I just finished when you and our paths crossed.
And I was 4 years into receiving my Social Security checks or something like that. I think our age difference is
So
vast.
that's why she bought lunch.
That's exactly right. So I love having you on the show as much as I do,
Love being here.
but it's always so fun to hear about what you're reading. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, absolutely, I
All right,
will.
go for it.
So I am visiting Nashville, and I do not have my copy of the book that I want to talk about, but I will share it with everyone. The um, book three of a series that I recently finished, and for any of those or any person out there who loved the book Scythe, or have loved any dystopian book. Like Scythe to me combines all of the beautiful things about dystopian writing and all of the horrible things about dystopian writing and pulls it all together into one trilogy. And it is a powerhouse
Mm.
series. I couldn't get enough of it. So the first book, Scythe, is followed up by Thunderhead. And so Scythe sort of sets the scene with this world where you have these people called Scythes. The world, death has been eradicated from this world, the future world, and they've run into issues of overpopulation. So they've had to start creating Scythes. Scythes were installed to be the population watchers, to meet a quota every year. And so we meet our two protagonists, Rowan and Citra, in that first book. In the second book, we see them become more, the book becomes more politicized because they become like activists in this second book. But at the end of the second book, their lives as we know it change. And in the toll, this is when we begin to see the closure of that story. And I don't want to say too much because if people haven't read Scythe, I want them to read Scythe. And if they haven't read Thunderhead yet, I want them to feel the call to read Thunderhead. But there was something about the toll where I'll say, you talked about a friend of yours or an acquaintance or someone who said instead of talking about what books, what they were about, talk about how they made you feel.
Mhm.
And I think I'm going to do that with this one. I felt a deep sense of acceptance. You know, when you read things and you feel like this author sees you and this
Mhm.
author sees people, I felt like that. There is a transgender character in The Toll. There is, and beautifully done, I thought. The language of the book made me feel like I just needed to grab my notebook and start penning all of these lines. We see these characters who are so youthful and naive in the first book grow into these young adults who aren't so innocent anymore, but they've retained something that still makes them very humane. And so, third book, you have this prophet-like character who is coming into power of his own. And then you have Citra and Rowan who are still battling. But the thing is, they are separated by so much. Their paths do intersect, but not in a way that I was expecting. And the ending of the book, that like whenever this whole thing came together, like the closure of it,
Mm.
I just thought, what a gorgeous way to end something. So I cannot recommend that series enough. I have talked about it and talked about it and talked about it in my classroom. And I had to go buy more copies because students
Mhm.
were just itching to read the story. And they're getting that part. You know how those hardback books, I'm sorry, I don't want to take too
Yeah,
long, but you know those hardback books, the dust jacket will start to get ripped and then it
yeah,
starts to lose its color, it fades. And you know, that to me is the biggest book talk that will ever be given. That is a testament to the love that has
yes.
been given to that book.
Yeah, you can always tell a book that is well loved by the age that it shows, right? Every small
Yeah.
print. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you talked about size and that you didn't give away the toll because, full disclosure, I had just finished yesterday Thunderhead.
Hmm.
So I haven't started the toll yet, though it's sitting on my bookshelf right over there.
Yeah.
So I'm excited
Uh,
to read it. And what is so amazing to me, two things I wanted to say about your book talk. The first is that everybody I've talked to who's read Toll, it's had a very polarizing reaction. I've
Interesting.
either gotten, oh my gosh, it's the best possible way that
Hmm.
the series could end, or oh my gosh, it ruined the whole series.
Mm.
So it's very polarizing. I'm really excited to read it for myself. And then the second thing that I wanted to mention that I've been thinking about since I started Scythe was just, and this is sort of an underlying theme to the book, or at least in the first two that I've read, is just the effect um, that being able to live together excuse me, live forever, rather, the effect
Hmm.
of being able to live forever has on humanity's drive to make art, to create, to leave the world better. If you're no matter what you do, things are always going to stay the same. What
Hmm.
happens to that drive? Right.
Right. Yeah.
So that part's been real interesting to me too, and I
Yeah.
think could lead to some really rich conversations with kids.
It could. One thing I want to clarify, I misspoke. It's not a transgender character. I'm very sorry. It's a gender fluid character. And I should have. That's a grave error on my part. But the other thing is that, in addition to what you said, I think that was beautiful. One of the things, as I've been going around and talking with students um, during reading conferences, I call them check-ins in my
Mm-hmm.
classroom. But something that I love to do is when I see that they're reading Scythe, because I've read it, that helps boost that conversation. And it, I'm not going to lie and say I've read every single book that they're reading, and that's virtually impossible. But when I see that they're reading this one of the questions I'll ask them is, what do you think this author is saying about the world? What do you think this author is saying about people? And you're right; these books have done so much to really I, galvanize, that may be a little too strong, but to really help push conversations with students
Yeah.
where they're not just seeing it as this very didactic thing. It is, we're seeing story through metaphor. I mean, this is, basically it could be a metaphor for our world.
Well, I think good dystopian fiction does that.
Hmm.
But also, if I think about just Neil Shusterman in general and his catalog, I mean, what a master. Like, you just
Yeah.
think about all the books he's written and how different they are, even though many have a dystopian or science fiction or fantastical sort of edge to them.
Hmm.
I mean, Scythe has been such a huge departure. I can't wait to see what he does next.
Hmm. I know. And he won the National Book Award for Challenger Deep,
Right.
which felt like a sharp departure from what he's
Hmm.
usually done, like the
Hmm.
Unwind series.
Sure.
Everlost, isn't that Everlost is the name of that series?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then you have the Scythe series, and here's Challenger Deep, which was
Right.
amazing, but it was such a sharp. So I feel like he's a very versatile writer.
For real, I think he's got his talent is very broad. I also loved Dry, which he did with his son Jared.
Hmm.
I don't know if you read that one also. I mean, I just think he's a really important voice
Yes.
right now in young adult literature. And I didn't want to read the Scythe series. The covers didn't really appeal to
Hmm.
me. I just thought, I'm going to skip that one. And then as people started talking about it, I knew I had to correct that error. And I'm really glad that I did. So.
Yeah. So did you? What? I can't talk. Did you find that Scythe really did draw you into the world? Did you feel like
Oh,
I thought he did a good job at world building.
oh yeah. But to me, like, I think we've had this conversation before, like when it comes to fantasy or sci-fi, the world building is secondary for me as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
I find that as a reader, I have to care about the characters and I have
Mm-hmm.
to want things for them, I have to
Yeah.
be invested in their story. And then the world, of course, becomes a part of, affects their story and becomes a part of their journey.
Mm-hmm.
But the world is less important to me than the characters. For
Mm-hmm.
me as
Okay.
a reader, I'm less drawn into all of the aspects of the world itself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm much more interested in the characters. And so somebody like Schusterman does a really great job of letting the world inform the journey. Like their journey couldn't exist outside of this world that he's created.
Mm-hmm.
But the most important part is that these two or these people and the universal conflicts that they're going through. It's why we can
Mm-hmm.
relate to it, even though we
Right.
don't live in a world like that.
Right.
So,
Right.
I love that. That's a powerful part of fantasy, or really all fiction, but fantasy and dystopia,
Mm-hmm.
I think. So,
Nice.
well, I'm going to take a
So
hard left.
I want to hear about yours.
Yeah, I love that discussion though. That was awesome. So,
Yeah, it was.
we could just do this forever. This is my favorite part of this show. Is I just get to talk with my friend about books. That's it,
Yeah.
right? It's like a virtual
Mm-hmm.
book club. We just need some wine, and we'll be ready.
Exactly. That's right.
But I'm going to take a hard left turn because the book that I'm choosing to talk about this week is very, very different from
Mm.
the Scythe series and Toll. It's actually a collection of essays, not just essays in the traditional sense, but also a collection of poems, a collection of screenplays, a
Mm-hmm.
collection of essays, a collection of illustrations, that all revolve around the central theme of what it means to be fat.
Mm-hmm.
The title of the book is The Other F Word, a celebration of the fat and fierce. And it is edited by Angie, I think it's Manfredi. And this book was gifted to me last year by, I feel like I'm going to name drop now, so get ready, by our friend Donalyn Miller.
Ah.
And I had it for a while. I just put it aside. It was like on my list, and then other things just kept rising to the top. And then I recently was able to dig in and read it, and it is a book that has touched me so deeply in so many different ways. It's almost hard to explain. I want to point out a couple of things before I talk about just a couple of the essays that are in the book.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's really powerful about this book is the artwork that's in it as well. I want to start with the end papers. I don't know if it's easy for you to see, but the end
Yeah.
papers are these dancing people.
Mm.
They're pretty gender neutral, but the representation in there is so beautiful. There are some folks in wheelchairs. You can tell there are people of different races. The genders are neutral. You don't really know, but it's a beautiful collection. And I feel like it really encapsulates the theme of the book, in which this is a book not about victims. This is the book that's not about people who feel shunned by the world, although
Mm.
there is obviously some discussion of how the world treats fat people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really a collection of stories about empowerment and about feeling comfortable in your own skin, and about taking who you are and loving that regardless of what the world thinks or tries to make you feel about
Mm-hmm.
yourself. And you'll recognize, I'm sure, many of the authors and illustrators and talents in the book. There's the opening story is by Alex Gino, who wrote
Mm-hmm.
Marge, and they talk about sort of the contradiction and also similarities that exist for people who are both transgender and fat. Because
Mm-hmm.
something I hadn't even thought about was Alex Gino talks about how in the transgender world, which they're a part of,
Mm-hmm.
and a common mantra is around the ability to change your body if you so choose, because
Yeah.
it doesn't match your identity. And yet in the body positive world, which Alex Gino is also a part of, The
Mm-hmm.
common mantra is, you don't need to change your body for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is like, seems to be in contradiction, but also they talk about how they are similar and how they navigate those two worlds. There's also a beautiful poem by Renee Watson, who wrote Pieces
Mm.
Together, which is
Yes.
one of my favorite books of all time. There's also a beautiful poem by David Bowles, who wrote They Call
Mm-hmm.
Me Guero, which of course won the Purell Prix last year, and is a wonderful exploration of what it means to be fat and also Mexican.
Mm-hmm.
And I say I use the word Mexican intentionally. I'm not just talking about Latinx. I'm talking about specifically people from Mexico.
Yeah.
And then one of my very favorite essays is by Julie Murphy, who of course
Ah,
wrote
yes.
Dumplin', and
Mm-hmm.
she writes
The
an entire like love letter to the character of Ursula from The Little Mermaid.
oh, that's so
And
cool.
it's so amazing because as she's talking about Ursula and how Ursula was a character that really meant a lot to her,
Mm-hmm.
she talks about her research into finding out what inspired the character of Ursula. And in her research, she finds that Ursula, and I didn't know this, and it's fascinating to me, was inspired by Divine, who was, of course, a
Oh,
drag
yes.
queen.
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely. The pink flamingo and like
yes,
from the 70s, the John Waters, because didn't John,
exactly.
yes. Oh my gosh.
I know, right? And she puts it like in all capital letters. Of course, Ursula was inspired by a drag queen. Like, of course,
Uh-huh.
right?
Right.
And so that, of course, spoke to my heart. And, and it just goes on and on. There's one essay by an author I didn't even know, who talks about the lack of fat representation in horror, which is something I had not ever even thought about. And yet, as a huge horror fan, it felt like my eyes were being opened to something I hadn't even thought about before. So
Mm-hmm.
I just, obviously I'm a big girl myself. So, my own experiences inform my reaction to this book. But
Mm-hmm.
I just found myself feeling like, oh my gosh, this is a book all kids need access to.
You're right.
Because like with so many other books in which we're seeing representation that isn't very common in literature for young people, this book does two really important things. It gives voice to people who don't often have a voice in in young people's literature, so that fat kids like me can see themselves. But also for those folks who aren't fat,
Mm-hmm.
it conveys the message that is true about all identities, that not all fat people are the same. Every experience is different.
Right.
Just like all people of color are the same, or not all gay people are the same. We lump
Mm-hmm.
people into categories based on what we can see, and yet people are unique and complex and beautiful and filled with
Mm-hmm.
so many um, different qualities to be explored and to be celebrated. So it's The Other F Word,
Wow.
and it is by Angie Manfredi, and I just really loved it and think you should read it right
All right. So I really appreciate you sharing that one, because in the time that we have left, if I have a moment, I want to
now.
share a couple of things.
Go for it.
One of the things like, we live in a world that is so much based on expectation
Mm-hmm.
and up on stereotypes.
Sure.
So when we have people who begin to write things that defy those expectations and defy those stereotypes,
Mm-hmm.
then we begin to see backlashes from people who want to see them remain in place. And that's why I'm really thankful for people who are writing about body positive things, but also about the honesty of it. Like, this is who I am, or this is who we are, or this is, how I feel. And that seems like a powerful collection that I want to read. I look out and I see people like Julie Murphy who are writing, Roxane Gay, who is writing, and,
Yeah.
trying to help promote this idea. The second thing I wanted to say is at NCTE this past year, I was rather fortuitously paired. I did a session I was doing a presentation on toxic masculinity with my friend Andy Shinborn.
Mm-hmm.
And we were paired with a young lady from New York, I think. And I should know this, but I know her name for sure, and that's Caitlin O'Connor.
Mm-hmm.
And she talked about, and her talk was about the body and about how the body is a text and how we should, whenever, and it was about fatness. And she talked in this, and she was the first to, she was very vocal about, she says, I know that, she says, I own the way I look because I'm okay with who I am. And she
Mm-hmm.
talked in her conversation about how we shy away from using the word fat. And she said, I
Yeah.
don't have a problem with, because it's what something is, or it's, it's how I can describe myself. And she said students of hers were like, oh, you shouldn't say that. And she was like, why? It normalizes it. We
Right.
begin to normalize something. The other thing that she mentioned, which I never thought about, but thankfully I really have started moving away from that traditionalist that I was in the classroom years
Mm-hmm.
ago. She talked about how um, very traditional seating in the classroom with rows is privilege seating,
Mm-hmm.
and how it's very, for people who are larger, for fat, she said, for fat people trying to get in and out of rows, and even being forced to sit in a desk, what if you can't?
Right.
And especially the desks that they have in middle school and even in high school, some of them are ancient. They're not built for, how, not all bodies. And I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
problem, and that's privilege, right? The other thing that she mentioned was, there was a collection of, and she mentioned flexible seating. She said classrooms should really rely more on flexible seating to provide
Yeah.
access for all students. And the other thing, she mentioned a collection of essays about the body, and I cannot remember the name of it, but this has inspired me, and I'm going to go back. I'm going to get in touch with her, reach out to her, and get that. I would love to send it to you, and it may be one that eventually I
Yeah.
talk about. But they're very they're very professional essays. They're like, studies. They are very academic. So, and I'm not saying that the compendium that you have is not, but these are written by like, this is, feels more like a college textbook.
Sure. Not written for young people.
Absolutely not written for young people. But still, yet I thought, she shared that with me, and there I'm sitting in that session listening, because she went first, and Andy and I are sitting there, and I just pull my notebook out and I'm starting to take notes, and I'm like, this is stuff I I want to call myself an accepting person, but until you begin to unpack your own understanding, that's when you
Exactly.
begin the journey.
Right. And I think that that's true of all areas of inclusivity.
Yeah,
I like the way you put that. Until you begin to unpack your own understanding, you're limited by the walls around that
yeah,
understanding. So no matter no matter what type of inclusivity you're talking about, it begins there.
it
And
does.
then when you start thinking about how do I create an environment for kids in which kids can worry less about who they are and how that's being judged,
Hmm.
and think more about the work at hand, you know, to
Yeah.
remove that barrier. And for, like you said, for bigger kids, whether that means I don't have to worry about if I'm going to knock somebody when I'm walking down the aisle, I don't have to
Hmm.
worry if I'm going to fit into this desk, I don't have to worry about those things. Those things are just even unconsciously removed
Yeah.
from the thought process, and they can think more about the work, and more about the learning, which is
Did
important.
Did you read Hunger by Roxane Gay?
Yes.
In that book, if I'm not mistaken, she talked about how every time she gets on an airplane, she has to
Yeah.
ask for the seatbelt extension.
Right.
And she, every time she tries to do things so that's taken care of,
Hmm.
but it seems as though she always has to go through the same avenue to get the extension on the seatbelt, which,
I feel like this is like becoming a Jennifer LaGarde therapy session. But as somebody who travels a lot and is a big person too, and who's had to ask for the seatbelt extension as well, I think for people who are fat, you just travel through the world constantly being aware of how much space you take up. And what's very interesting to me, and this could be a whole other recording,
mm,
is how empowered other people feel to comment on that. And Roxane Gay has talked about that, like
yeah,
how people may see you and your race and have opinions about that, but don't feel mostly, for the most part, don't feel empowered to say something to you about it. Sure, there are extreme people who do, but for the
Mm-hmm.
most part, it's not socially acceptable to make a negative comment about someone based on their race. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's interesting too, but for fat people, it is like, if somebody makes a comment about me being fat, then that a lot of people might laugh or think that's okay. Like that's just part of it. And I think it's interesting in this book where I'm going to take it back to this book. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things that they talk about is how, and anybody watching this show who has like stayed with us for this long, it's just so interesting to me where we've gone. But they tell one of the essays in this book talks about the frequent friendships between fat women and gay men
Mm-hmm.
because they share this bond of being it's socially acceptable for people to make a disparaging comment about both of those groups.
Yeah,
Like they're othered in different and yet very similar ways.
it's true.
Um, and it's just something like I hadn't really ever thought about.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, boy, that makes a lot of sense. And I think about, teenagers reading about this stuff just I'm going to use your turn of phrase again, the way that helps them to unpack their understanding. And also, I love collections like this because it also helps teens and young readers see authors as human beings.
Yeah.
As these are real people, not old dead guys who lived a long time ago. Like these are
Right.
people living now who are experiencing some of the same things I do.
That's right.
So
And here
anyway,
is a way that I can think about it. It's not, and I love that really good authors are wanting to show you a way to think about it and to give you, it's what, and I can't remember the guy's name, but in fiction, imaginative rehearsals.
yeah,
But in this, what I think is the most profound thing about that is knowing you're not alone.
exactly.
There is community in that reading, and that matters.
And I think that's what's so important and powerful about fiction,
Yeah,
is that
that's right.
the way that it connects people and experiences. So, wow, what a great show.
I know. How deep.
I know. How about that? We were just going to talk about two books and look at where we went. I think this was like the director's cut, maybe.
Right.
I love it. I love it. Well,
I do too.
Travis,
I love you, my friend.
I'm so glad that we got a chance to chat in public for the whole world to see. I look forward to the next time Brad is absent so that way I can call on you again. Thank you for always being his willing understudy.
I love doing this. Thank you for having me as always.
I love it. And if any of you out there are wanting to see what books Brad and I and Travis on occasion have recommended in the past, or you would like to watch the archives of our show, because why wouldn't you? I mean, after
Hmm.
this, I know you're just dying for more. Then you can visit our archives at bit.ly/read_this_now. Until then, happy reading, everybody.
Goodbye.